because every QA tech that I've worked with and everyone that I've hired has at one time or another had to express some frustration or just some uneasiness about how do I have conversations, particularly with this one employee who always takes it so personally, right? So that's always a challenge.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's up, Clean Freaks? It's Hank Balch here in studio with Bobby Parker, and we are talking today about quality assurance in sterile processing as a role. This is the season of the roles that make us great. And so we're going to drill down the next half hour on the role that spends its time, its passion, its effort, its energy, its knowledge, Bobby, on getting quality right.
And not just getting it right, but assuring that it's right, because hope is not a strategy when it comes to quality. You know, that is the plan that a lot of us have, is quality hoping. And today we're going to talk about moving to quality assurance. So this will be good.
All right. Well, hang with us. We'll be right back in studio diving into this QA topic. And hey, before we come back, go grab your best friend who loves quality, wants to get their trays right and assure that they're right. And we'll be right back in studio in just a moment.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Clean Freaks, we are back in studio. Bobby Parker and I. What's up, Bobby?
Hey, Hank, ready to talk about some QA techs, quality assurance.
Yeah, quality assurance techs. I've also heard them called quality assurance coordinators. Even I've seen some quality assurance managers out there. I don't know if you've ever run into those in your travels, but you know, we've got a lot of different categories of the role and the title maybe, but the scope of responsibilities and the vision for this QA position is really what we want to dive into today. And we have addressed this or alluded to this role a number of times through the history of the podcast because it's such a core of our experience. And I think, Bobby, you and I both in our early departments, this was just kind of the status quo. You know, like we grew up as sterile processing technicians, assuming this is a normal position that everybody had and everyone knows what they do and respects what they do. And it is what it is. And it wasn't until I got a lot farther down the leadership route and then started traveling as a consultant when I realized this is an uncommon position, even though it's very much needed. There's a large gap in the opportunities out there for folks that would even want to do this kind of role, or if they do want to do it, there's a challenge getting it justified. So we're going to talk through a lot of those kind of nuances today.
Yeah, and I think that's where the value in this season really comes into play as we describe these roles that make us great. I mean, some of it is for those kind of outside the industry looking in, but a lot of our industry folks, either managers or technicians who may be hearing about quality assurance positions for the first time and are trying to figure out how do we organize our department systematically around quality and putting some processes in place that go beyond just reminding everybody to be more careful and everybody to do a better quality job for the patient and hoping for the best. And so, yeah, this will be a good one to dive into what does that job description actually look like? What do they typically do? And then hopefully by the end of the episode, you could, with your scratch pad, be able to put together a rough idea of what a job description might look like for this person and start that justification process to try to organize quality in your department. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely a lot of help. It doesn't have to be bringing on this, big expensive manager to oversee this process. It can be done kind of at the grassroots level, but it's really important and there's not a whole lot of it being done out there.
In the previous episodes, we kind of started with the job description to define what it is we're talking about. But on this episode, before we get to that, and we are going to get to the job description, because this is the first real specialist position that we've discussed on the show so far, I thought maybe this is a good time just to talk high level about specialization in sterile processing. This is one of the more controversial topics and positions that I've had out there in the space. I think it's debate in the industry at large in a lot of different ways. There's pros and cons. I'm not going to be sitting here and saying there's only one right way or there's one best way. I think there's trade-offs. But at a high level, explain your experience with this type of specialist position and maybe give some other examples of some specialist positions that you've seen out there so folks can kind of get this in the right mental category.
Yeah. So the department that I started in had a quality assurance technician role. It was considered a technician 3. So you could be a certified tech 2, but then in addition to that certification and some experience and some, excellence in your position over time could graduate into a tech 3 role that specialized in something. And so again, we're going to get into that, what the roles and duties of that quality assurance technician are in a bit, but the advantage to having somebody who has some intentional carved out time to be doing that quality assurance is that they get really, really good at it. And that's always the number one pro on the pros and cons list for specialization, is if you can identify somebody who's going to do this regularly, they get really, really good at it. So in terms of reviewing your documentation, doing proactive quality checks on your case cards, proactive quality checks on your instrument trays, you have somebody who's experienced with a sharp eye, who's helping kind of guide the quality in the department forward. Other specialist positions that I've seen, we've talked at Beyond Clean about implementing an OR liaison, kind of that customer service level employee who's trying to smooth things out for the OR and really understand their preference cards and their needs, and somebody who can get really, really good at reading schedules. Some departments use their instrument specialist, like an instrument coordinator role at that technician specialist level. And I think we're actually going to talk about instrument coordinators later in this season, but somebody who can get really, really good at understanding instrument model numbers and surgeon preferences and being able to make sure that that instrument trial doesn't go over like a lead balloon and everybody's on the same page. So there's really a lot of options that live out there, and particularly in a smaller department that doesn't have a lot of resources to be having lead techs and supervisors and all of these things, and it's just the manager and their techs. I think there's a lot of value in making your certified techs have kind of one of these specialist badges. You've got your certified quality gal, got your certified sterilization records checker who does all the BIs, your instrument coordinator, your schedule reader and prioritizer. And I think that kind of specialization can be valuable. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of all my thoughts about it.
And, it brings up a really important point that I'm sure folks are kind of thinking about is, hey, it's hard enough to just get anybody approved to hire, like any technician type position. But now you're wanting me to go and say, hey, there's this brand new technician that's not even in like our HR records. There's no number. There's no job description. And you want to hire this kind of person. And what we've done, for better or worse, if there's HR folks, compliance folks out there listening, that you may get a little grumpy. But in the past, we've just said, yeah, we're not even going to deal with the HR side of things, but we are going to handle this opportunity internally. So it's not on paper, it's not a new role or position, but in the life of the department, it is a different opportunity to specialize and to serve the department in various ways. And a lot of the examples that you kind of laid out, especially for the smaller facilities, that may be the way that you need to go. And many times, teams just naturally do this. You kind of are drawn to what you're good at, And then everyone else on the team is like, yeah, Johnny's great in decontam, so he's going to be our decontamination specialist if Johnny loves it back there. And then everyone just kind of knows it's not in his job description. He's just a normal technician like everyone else is, but that's where he lands. But one other specialty position that we haven't talked a ton about, but I just want to put on people's radar as they're thinking through this category of staffing, is the database specialist. And I bring that up, Bobby, because that was my first specialist growth opportunity out of a technician. So I was a technician, I was certified, and then at that time, my manager gave me the opportunity to become the instrument database specialist in our team. And I got to nerd out on our tracking system and really become, I think the more common phrase now is a super user of the technology and the software. And it was so valuable for me as a newer technician to just get new mental categories, to really see the bigger picture of what's going into the data side of things, the workflow, all the documentation that happens, and all the gaps and the impacts of broken data, incomplete count sheets, incorrect numbers, like all those things that, everyone kind of grumbles about because it impacts you on an individual basis. But as that instrument database specialist, I had the time, as you said, to dedicate and really drill down to that. And that was a terrific role. And I think a very unique one, again, when you kind of look out there across the industry. It's not like no one has those, but that's probably at the bottom of the pack of these kind of specialty positions. So.
Right. And you don't have to be an IT whiz bang to be able to make a big impact and difference on your inventory and your database. I know that, Hank, was surprised to hear that was your role, because I've answered some of the computer related questions that you've asked me.
Yeah, you're our IT guy, Bobby.
That's right. But yeah, it is super important. Well, Hank, as we have teased out this QA position long enough here, let's dive into what are the types of things that this specialist might be doing in the department at the high level. What would you see a job description looking like for this role?
I'm going to get a little saucy in this, Bobby, because I think job descriptions are one of the most boring things on earth these days. If you read them, it's just like, that was written by a robot. There's no way that a human actually put that in there. But I say saucy because I would say these people help us to break the status quo of the department in relation to the process and the quality output of our instrumentation. What that looks like on a practical level is, looking at every aspect of our reprocessing workflow, which is starting in decontamination, and, going into that room with the time, with the scope of responsibility and the support on the leadership side to say, hey, look around this, tell us what we need to start measuring in decontam. And then let's identify some areas that we can improve the quality through that measuring and auditing, and then that feedback loop that comes back to our technicians and our leadership team to say, hey, we need to address whatever this scenario is. A great example in the decontamination area, but then it has a flow out into the clean side, is how many dirty instruments are coming out of your decontamination on a regular basis, right? So these are things that have made it through supposedly the entire workflow, manual cleaning, automation, and it comes out to the clean side, and then it's discovered, ooh, this Fraser suction's still dirty, or ooh, there's still bone in this kerosene. Well, if there's no one with a quality assurance hat on that's responsible for this, all that data goes into the netherworlds. It's not tracked. It's not follow up on. It's not trained around. There's no feedback coming to decontam, but there's also no feedback coming to the entire process. And that model, that experience is duplicated across the entire workflow. You go into the prep and pack area and you look around and say, hey, what kind of data can we be gathering in this prep and pack area that would measure our current state of quality and would give us any kind of trending? Is our quality getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it getting worse on particular days or nights or weekends or what have you? And then again, through the sterilization stage, like you kind of mentioned, the documentation piece is a huge quality outlier many times. Like, how are we documenting compliantly, completely? Are we having failures on our BI testing, et cetera? And then obviously the big quality goal is nothing makes it to the operating room that does not meet the highest quality standards that we put out. And so that QA role really is the entire workflow and all the data points that could be coming out of each stage of that workflow to be managing, documenting it, and then to be assisting the educator, the lead tech, the rest of the team on now how do we address the data that we're seeing from that quality side.
Yeah, and I appreciate bringing in data into this conversation. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with our Beyond Clean leadership expert from the Expert Series. John, as I was talking with him in the Expert Series conference recently, he was describing how sterile processing departments tend to be results oriented in terms of measuring data, right? We love to put in our spreadsheets our results data, things that we get back from the OR. So if we're talking about quality, that would be like number of trays that came back from the OR with a defect, number of bioburden events that we've had, number of immediate use sterilization cycles that we had. And those things do need to be measured and reported. But if those are the only things that you're looking at, the result of the whole process, it never really answers the question, how do we make improvements? We're just kind of trying random things and trying to make it stick. The real value comes when we bring it a little bit closer and start measuring and reporting out on some process-oriented results. And so things like you're talking about of how often are the trays that come through decontamination clean and appropriate for assembly, and how often are we sending them back to decontamination? That's not necessarily a result, but if we can measure at that point and get some data around that, that can start giving us some things that we can educate on and start making a difference. And eventually, as you measure those processes inside your department and make some improvements there, you'll start to see some positive impacts at the results level where we typically collect our data. So that quality assurance tech can certainly help you figure out what are those processes that we need help with and need measuring. But even if it's not measuring data and doing those quality processes, one of the primary kind of cardinal responsibilities of that quality assurance tech often has to do with just random sampling, QAing of trays, right? Pulling a tray that's either just been assembled by a technician and it hasn't been sterilized yet, or pulling one off the shelf and going through it and hopefully getting enough of those that's statistically significant and representative of your product as a whole, and start looking at it. And there's a lot of advantages to doing that kind of proactive quality assurance that technicians and supervisors and managers don't ever find the time to get to. And there's a lot of advantages to jumping into those trays proactively instead of just waiting on the OR to give you that feedback, right? And I think the biggest one is when we open the trays from sterile processing, we have a pretty good idea of what needs to be in there, how the instruments ought to be arranged, where the indicators are placed. And we probably are going to look at that tray with a higher degree of scrutiny than the OR when we send it to them and they open it up and they're hurrying up just to get it ready for Dr. Smith who needs it right now. You might get a better idea of what your quality actually looks like if you've got some SPD eyes on your inventory. What's your experience been with that in terms of doing those proactive quality assurance checks?
Yeah, Bob, I mean, that's such an important theme in this conversation of QA that, really it deserves more time, but we don't have time on this episode to dive in. But the traditional model in sterile processing has been if the OR is not complaining, everything's good. That's a broad brush, but at just high level. If the OR, if the doctor, if we're not seeing, spikes in infection, whatever else, then whatever we're doing is working. Well, that's definitely relying on the status quo. That's not continual process improvement, clearly. But number two, it's completely reactive, as you kind of alluded to. And so, yeah, that proactive piece is absolutely critical. And I just want to caveat here in the description of the specialist role in answering your question, what I've seen out in the VA space many times is they actually integrate that check into the entire technician team that's on the reprocessing floor. And so, like, you complete a tray, and then you got to go get someone else's eyes on it before you even put that thing in a container or you wrap it. And that is QA activity, even outside of this specialist role. So that's just like another great example of, hey, all these things we're throwing out here, they need to be done. Someone needs to be doing these things. It doesn't have to be in a dedicated role. but to really lead and guide this at the level that's necessary in some facilities to dig out of the big quality hole that you may find yourself in, you likely do need someone, even if it's just on a part-time basis. Maybe they're a technician that works 20 hours a week on normal assignments, and you got 20 hours a week that they're dedicated to doing this kind of QA checking activity. One more quick comment, though, on the random sampling quote that you threw out there, Bob, because I've got a bone to pick with some of that, in that I have seen QA technicians do a completely random sample of, they just randomly pick trays off the shelf, and there's no rhyme or reason. And at scale, that would work if you're able to take enough trays randomly. However, you should add in a little bit of intention to those random samples to say, are we sampling trays from every individual on the team? Are we sampling trays of every complexity from every individual on the team? And then are we sampling trays that we know have the highest likelihood of quality issues because of all the other data that we have? And so if you're kind of triangulating all those different categories, and that makes your random sampling still random because you're not targeting people, but not so random that it can potentially be unhelpful, for the goal of that sampling. I do want to, as we kind of wrap up here on this segment, Bobby, I want to give you the opportunity briefly to outline what a normal day for a QA tech would look like, just for the folks who's like, okay, guys, this is completely foreign to my experience. I have no idea, okay, quality data, they need to be checking trays, but what does this actually look like on just a normal day, clocking in, you're spending 8 hours at QA tech? What are you going to be doing?
Well, unsurprisingly, the answer to that question is going to look different everywhere, right? Right. Yeah. But the concept that I would have in my mind is somebody who maybe they'll start their day by reviewing the sterilizer records and the washer performance records from the day before to make sure that all the ones that have been filled out are done so appropriately. And maybe they're that person who collects all of the checked records and puts them in that bin that's going to get sent off for storage. Or if you're all digital, they're the ones who, check off the QA button so that it can be archived and not worried about any further. And then they might go through your case carts and this may be the first thing that they do for the day if they get in early enough to look at those case carts before that first room gets started and making sure that the contents match the count sheet or the pick list, and that your OR is not going to call frustrated with their hair on fire at 7:30 wanting to know where that tray is. They might come back to the department and help out as a technician in those kind of first priorities that we know that we're going to need later in the day. And then once everything is kind of settled after that first AM break, they might grab a couple of trays from the sterile storage area, a couple of them that have been prepped that morning for the sterilizer, and go through those with a checklist of what they're looking for, whether that's indicators in the right place, items matching the count sheet, instruments free of debris or bioburden, and all of these things, checking the packaging, making sure our rigid containers weren't damaged, and then filling that record out and then turning that into a supervisor. And so really they would have to try to figure out how to balance their time between being the technician who helps in the department on the floor, helps with the priorities, and then making sure that all of our records and all of our trays that are going to the OR are excellent. And then they've got to carve in a little bit of discretionary time for dealing with how are we going to make improvements rather than just documenting the errors that we have. What kind of education are we going to put together for the team? And then the decision of who's going to talk with the technician whenever something has gone wrong in those trays. And I know that's one that's worth a brief conversation as we talk about, who's the right person to put in this quality assurance role. Because every QA tech that I've worked with and everyone that I've hired has at one time or another had to express some frustration or just some uneasiness about how do I have conversations, particularly with this one employee who always takes it so personally, right?
Right.
And so that's always a challenge.
Yeah, they see you coming as a QA tech and they're like, uh-oh, what did I do? Which tray did I screw up and which doctor is complaining about that? And yeah, Bob, that's a great place to begin wrapping this episode, honestly, is all the conversation we've had around the data, the workflow, the focus on improvement. It still comes down to these personal relationships that are very, very important from that that person that you put into this role, because yeah, they have to be able to catch the quality, committed to quality, but they have to be able to communicate this in a positive way that is complementary and kind of collaborative with your front line, or immediately you create this divisiveness that the QA is no longer on the team of the technicians and they're like against the technicians and trying to find all the areas the technicians have messed up. And that's not a model that's going to be successful. So really pay special attention to that cultural piece, like you alluded to, Bob, on who you hire and how you communicate what the responsibility and the roles are. Whether or not it's the QA who's actually going to the technician, everyone knows who found the problem. And so you need to manage that one way or the other. All right, Bob, that's going to do it for this episode. Do you have any last thought here before we head out to the outro?
Just the importance of that proactive quality assurance. Don't be the department that is putting out fires all the time and never graduating beyond the urgency of just the crisis that's going on at the moment. It feels like there is not enough time to do proactive quality assurance. And in your department, that might be a reality right now, but that just speaks about how much are we willing to invest in the quality in our department. So do what you can to buy some time to start doing some proactive quality assurance, whether that's bringing in some temporary staff, asking for another team member, or doing the hard work of passing this episode along with a job description written out of what a QA tech looks like and a vision for what percentage of their time they'd be giving to quality assurance. Because there's a lot of good recommendations out there, even in our AAMI guidelines, for having a quality management system that is set up, and it will do wonders for your department when you get beyond just posting the results of your department and throwing stuff at the wall, hoping that we can finally start making some improvements. So definitely worthwhile exploring whether you've got a QA tech or just adding some QA responsibilities to your frontline leaders.
All right, so that's going to wrap up this episode. Bobby, the one thing that you said there at the very end that I do want to come back to, quality management. We are excited to kind of promote here. We've got a micro-credential program on quality management in sterile processing, sponsored by Agility in collaboration with Beyond Clean and CCI. So you can find out more information about that micro-credential. In the program for training, really there's no other training out there today if you really want to drill down into this quality question in sterile processing, but we've got a micro-credential that's going to do just that. So you can track it down at beyondcleanmedia.com/micro-credential. And Bobby, what have we got in store for Clean Freaks coming up next week? What should they be tuning in to hear about?
I don't want to call it my personal favorite because I think we already said that about educators, but if I could see myself settling into a role kind of at that first level beyond technician, it would probably be this one, and that's instrument coordinators. These are your garden tenders who keep the weeds out of your database, making sure that the right instruments are being ordered so that you don't end up with 1,800 different manufacturers of instruments, as all of us probably have in our trays. And so that'll be vitally important, talking about how to do that role really well and the value of adding one if you are one of those managers that's strapped with so many hats to wear and can't keep up with your instrument order.
Yeah, that is so common out there. Like if you meet a stressed out manager, 9 times out of 10, part of that stress is they're also the instrument coordinator, but without the title. So definitely tune in if you're a technician who's ever complained about your instrument inventory or your count sheets, or if you're a manager who's ever complained about your instrument inventory or your count sheets. We got an episode for you coming up on instrument coordinators. But until then, like we tell you all the time here at Beyond Clean, we want to encourage you each and every instrument, every time, to keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.